All right, good evening, everybody. My name is David Bulla. I'm the chair of the Department of Communication here at Augusta University and the Pamplin College. And tonight, we're lucky to have Gary Green here from the Student Press Law Center to give a wonderful talk about student journalism and the fact that they need to be protected just as much as the other journalists. This is our fourth Future of the First Amendment lecture. We appreciate the support of the Augusta University Libraries. And I'm going to ask Dean Brad Warren, to stand up very quickly. Thank you so much. And then also with Pamplin College, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And I'm going to ask Kim Davies, the dean there, to stand up. And let's give them a round of applause, because this would not happen without them. We're going to start tonight with a little patriotism. So I'm going to ask Hubert Van Tool, a professor emeritus from the Department of History, military historian, to come up and lead us in the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. So if everybody will stand, please.
Please rise and embody your spirit. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Thank you.
Man, do we miss your voice at graduation. Doesn't seem the same to have a computer voice. Thank you very much, Hubert. Before we get started, I wanted to give a few facts about the First Amendment. First of all, it's a short document, 45 words. It was written by a Virginian, James Madison. Originally, Madison and the other founders did not think we needed to write these civil rights down, because he thought we might leave out some of the key ones, and they didn't really want to. They really thought there were so many of them. They didn't want to have anybody leave out the most important ones, or ones that might be more important as time went by. But he changed his mind mainly because he did not want states to infringe on citizens' civil rights. So he thought they should be protected by the new federal government. The Bill of Rights was ratified on December 15th, 1791. Ironically, or coincidentally, Madison's state, Virginia, was the state whose ratification made it the law of the land. We are extraordinarily, and I mean that, extraordinarily lucky to have the legal protections of the human rights that are provided by the First Amendment. Much of the world has no such protection. And I've actually lived in a country where that was the case. And they take your passport away from you. Of course, we have to be a country that values the rule of law in order for this to work. It has for more than 230 years, and I will also add, as David Kearns will remind us probably later, that this coming year, or next year, 2026, will be the 250th anniversary of another important document, the Declaration of Independence. So accordingly, I think tonight we ought to start, before we turn things over to Gary, by standing up again, and this time with that yellow sheet of paper that Alyssa Jones and Siani Pearson gave you. Let's read together the 45 words of the First Amendment. So if everybody will please stand. This shouldn't be too hard, shouldn't take too long. A little bit easier than the national anthem. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All right, thank you very much, and you sit down now. Well, we're really fortunate tonight to have someone sort of fill this out for us in Gary Green. Gary's led the Student Press Law Center, which turned 50 last year, since 2023. And before taking over the leadership of the SPLC, he was a professor at Kennesaw State University, and he led the Center for Sustainable Journalism there. In that role, Green served as executive director and publisher of Youth Today and the Juvenile Justice Information Exchange, and launched in 2021 Fresh Take Georgia, which he based on Fresh Take Florida when he was in Florida before this, which was is a student-driven digital news service that covers the Georgia legislature and other issues of statewide, regional, and national interests. For 6 years prior to that, Green served as digital director of the University of Florida's Student-Driven Innovation News Center and deputy news director of WUFT, the NPR PBS affiliate for North Central Florida. But even though I was at the University of Florida about 25 years ago, I still listen to WUFT from time to time. During that time, he managed award-winning coverage, breaking news, daily and enterprise stories, investigative and long-form projects across TV, PBS, radio, NPR, web, and social media platforms. He co-founded First Take Florida, a news service that is run out of WUFT. He served as vice chair and on the board of trustees for 6 years at Florida's First Amendment Foundation. I think you're doing the same in Georgia, right? And currently serves on the advisory board of Florida Center for Government Accountability. Prior to moving to higher education and nonprofit news, he worked for 20 years as a photojournalist, so he's a blue-collar guy like a lot of us who were in journalism in the late 20th century and early 21st century, and that included stints at the Orlando Sentinel and at the Akron Beacon Journal. His degrees are from Ohio University, undergraduate degree, and his master's in mass communication from the University of Florida. His lecture tonight, this is again the fourth Future of the First Amendment lecture here at Augusta University, is titled, Student Journalism is Journalism. We must protect the rights. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Gary. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Bulla, for inviting me for this lecture today. Thank you for the deans to hosting this event. Thank you to everybody who helped put this event on, and thank you to the audience for showing up tonight. First and foremost, I am just an evangelist of student journalism as well as the First Amendment, and so it's really important to me to get out into the community and talk to you about the work that we're doing to try to support and spread the impact of student journalism. I kind of want to start off a little bit about the SPLC. The SPLC has been around for 50 years, as Dr. Bulla mentioned, and we were founded after a national study in 1968 that was a landscape analysis conducted by the Pulitzer Prize winning writer Jack Nelson, who I just recently learned was from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution at one point. And the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Foundation commissioned a study to learn what the landscape for scholastic journalism was across the country. That study found that censorship was pervasive across the country, as well as minority representation was largely missing in student media around the country in the late 60s. The recommendation of that study was to launch a national center to combat censorship and to help diversify student media newsrooms. Fast forward 5 decades, and I would say we are at an extraordinary time in the history of journalism and the history of student journalism. And I would love to say that we have had a huge impact on changing the original purpose of our center. But we're still here battling those same fights, maybe as hard today as we ever have. The work is as important as it ever has been, and we are as dedicated as we ever been to carry that forward, which is why I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about this tonight. When I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about, and Dr. Bulla and I had, we had some conversations, what do we really want to stress with this talk? The activity coming out of Washington in the last, since early January has really been paralyzing. I must have started my talking points for this lecture, I don't know how many times, and it seems like almost every hour it changed. And that's not really the point of what we're talking about tonight, but I just want to list a couple things. Most of these I think you're going to probably be pretty familiar with. The Associated Press banned from the Oval Office and Air Force One because they refused to change their style to call the Gulf of Mexico Gulf of America. ABC News agrees to give $15 million to Donald Trump's presidential library to settle a defamation suit. A Florida jury says CNN defamed a Navy veteran in a story about endangered Afghans. The jury awarded the plaintiff $5 million in damages. CBS appears poised to settle a Trump lawsuit over 60 Minutes editing video, a $10 billion lawsuit. President-elect Trump sued the Des Moines Register because of their Iowa election poll. President Trump has a personal defamation lawsuit against the Pulitzer Prize members of the board for the Pulitzer Prize. The U.S. government is now blocking federal employees from reading news on their company computers. And just yesterday, there was a former student from Columbia who was arrested and threatened with deportation because of his activity leading protests on the Columbia campus. All of this has just giant implications for the First Amendment and, more importantly, journalism and student journalism. There's a saying that when the United States gets the sniffles, the rest of the world catches a cold. Well, I would say that these sniffles that are impacting professional media is a full-on plague as it's going to trickle down into student media. When we see when smaller newsrooms see the president go after the largest, folks like the New York Times, 60 Minutes, CBS, CNN, that has just an extraordinary chilling impact on everybody on down the ecosystem. We now have nonprofit news organizations that are popping up in almost every community in America. We have student journalism newsrooms that are really contributing in a way to our local news ecosystem that they haven't before. And when we see that the large news organizations are settling lawsuits simply because they don't want to go head-to-head with the Trump administration, that has just, again, giant ramifications for what we're talking about tonight. And so, I've missed my slide, but lawfare, that's the point of this. This lawfare is what newsrooms are going to have to deal with. Just the threat of litigation. So many news organizations today do not have the legal resources to settle a $10 million lawsuit, to settle a $10 billion lawsuit, to pay $5 million in damages. Most professional news organizations have media liability insurance. Their rates are going to go up. Their business models are fragile. Only the strongest are going to survive. Many, many student news organizations simply do not have those types of resources, which is one reason why the SPLC is here. We provide pro bono legal services for any student journalist and or their advisor in any circumstance. But the reality of it is self-censoring is happening right now. Self-censoring happens because people want to avoid upsetting those in power. We see it every single day. Quite honestly, we don't get a lot of students who call us to say, I have been threatened with a lawsuit, what do I do? It's generally the intimidation or the censorship on the front end that they just shut down. They just stop reporting the story. So all of this happening at the White House, people are watching, and it's trickling down. The local news crisis is probably not news to anybody in this room, but it's getting worse. The Local News Initiative project out of the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern in Illinois, their recent report, 2.5 newsrooms close every week in the United States. There's been a net loss of 3,300 newspapers in the last 20 years. Total newspaper employment has decreased by 70%. More than half of U.S. counties don't have news anymore or have very limited news. And ghost newspapers plague our community. Ghost newspapers, newspapers that publish in a community but have almost no relevant news to that community. This is a crisis. We know that when communities lose their local news source, voter participation goes down, civic engagement goes down, polarization goes up, and Americans start to lose trust in their institutions. We have to do something about this, and students play a big role in it. Student journalists are filling critical gaps in your local news all over the country. There's an organization who is a strategic partner of SPLC's called the Center for Community News. They're based out of the University of Vermont. They're run by a gentleman by the name of Richard Watts. Richard and I have been working together for several years now, and his latest research, and this research is a couple years old, they're about to come out with new numbers that I expect is just going to blow these figures out of the water in May. But as of his last report, about 25 million readers in the United States were getting their local news from students. Many of those universities are placed in news deserts. There is a synergy here, and there's a responsibility that universities can play in these communities to keep their electorate informed. And students are playing a big part of that. There are 136 colleges and universities running university-led reporting programs. These are a little different than what you might think of traditional student media. Traditional student media might be your campus radio station, your campus TV station, your campus newspaper. Many of these programs look more like a faculty member running a digital news service out of their classroom, sending students down to county commission, city council meetings, school board meetings, state legislature, coming back, working with the students to write those stories, and then sharing them with partners across the state. These programs now are almost in 140 programs across the country, many of them in news deserts, and the Center for Community News and SPLC are committed to tripling that number in the next 5 years. And this project is funded by the Knight Foundation, who has played just a huge role in helping to solve the local news crisis, and they see student journalism as a key component to that. One of these projects is happening right here in the state of Georgia. Has anybody been paying attention to the Oglethorpe at UGA? So they have adopted this paper that was going to go out of business, and they've turned it into a student learning lab. Students take classes, they get credit for those classes, they go and report in the community, they get published in the newspaper, they get experience, they get bylines, they serve the community. The college feels good about it, the university feels good about it, the community feels good about it, and it's a win-win for everybody, and that is in a county that otherwise would have had no primary source of news. Daily Iowan is doing the same thing. They bought 2 papers that were on life support and have turned them into student learning labs. Now, that's not to say that traditional student media doesn't have a role to play here. In some ways, they're working adjacent to these programs. Sometimes they're collaborating with them. And sometimes those traditional student media publications are still the primary source of news. We held a 50th anniversary event last October at the New York Times, and the Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Nick Kristof came and spoke at our event. Turns out that when Nick was a high school student in his little bitty town of Yamhill, Oregon, his local newspaper shut down, went out of business. And they took his high school newspaper and they mailed it to every home in the county. It became the primary source of news. This was decades ago. This was like 48 years ago. But this was that canary in the coal mine, but it also served as an example of the power of student journalism. And Nick, as you might imagine, ruffled some feathers, and so they censored him. They shut him down. They said, you can't publish that. So then he wrote a story about them censoring him, and then they censored that. And so then they called us, and that's how we got to know Mr. Kristof and his legacy in that community. But the point being is that every single student who is engaging in this work has an opportunity to make a very real difference in their community. And the professors they work with, and the deans that support those professors and the administrations and the programs that are part of the community have an ability to help solve this crisis. State House reporting programs. You heard Dr. Bullis say that I had launched a couple. One was in Florida. I came and replicated it in Georgia. And essentially, we took anywhere from 10 to 15 students every semester. We taught them about state government. We taught them about public affairs reporting. We sent them down to the Capitol. We showed them how to follow a bill. And the whole idea between the brand Fresh Take was we were going to take a fresh look at the legislature. The idea behind that is that when you live in a city like Atlanta, every major news organization is going to cover the same 10 bills. But there might be 3,000 bills filed and 300 that are actually signed into law. But 280 of them never get any press because all that matters is the really controversial ones that all the media have to follow and chase. So what we did is we took students and we said, here's this giant trove of bills. Go in there and look at something that you find interesting and write a story about it. Follow that bill and produce a story that we can share with our partners and get it published potentially all over Atlanta, potentially all over the state of Georgia, potentially all over the country. I've had some students get stories published as far as Australia. Huge, huge opportunity. And those students, when they go into interview with the recruitment managers, one of my former students at Fresh Take Florida, he was interviewing for a paper in Florida for an environmental beat, and I said, well, why should I select you over every other student applicant that I had, this stack of papers? And he said, because you've been running my stories on the front page of your paper for weeks now. Seems like you like my stuff. He got the job. So I can think of no better example than to give them stories that they already want to run. But then there's also another idea called cohesion journalism. First time I heard of this word cohesion journalism came out of a white paper out of University of Southern California. And while I'm sitting here promoting, investigative work, State House reporting, in-depth public affairs reporting, the idea behind cohesion journalism is that when communities lost their community newspaper, they lost their obits, they lost their arts coverage, they lost their music coverage, they lost their business opening, they lost their business closing stories. They lost so much of what people used to pick up the newspaper for. And then that broke down community. I was at two big conferences recently. The first one was in Miami at the Night Media Forum. And the whole theme of that conference was we need to find a way back to have a sense of community. We need to find a way to feel connected again. A lot of that comes from those community fibers, the reporting that you do on your neighbor. When I was first coming up in journalism, that might have been called your hometown hero. You didn't hear about your hometown hero until a local paper wrote about it. And the reality of it is you're probably not going to get censored for producing cohesion journalism, but it still serves a great purpose in your community. And then when you go and do that hard-hitting story, I talked to some of the students today in a class, not every single story has to be a sledgehammer into campaign finance or financial malfeasance. If you end up doing stories about your community that actually builds a level of trust, then when you have to do the hard story, you have that credibility. You have more credibility. But we've lost a lot of that cohesion journalism, and the idea behind this white paper is high school programs are now doing that. And that's where we've got to get back to. We've got to get high school experiential learning opportunities within the lane of journalism. So younger people are learning about civics, younger people are learning about democracy, younger people are learning about the value of journalism in society. And I'm going to come back to that. So I want you to keep that in mind, the value of journalism in society. The reality of it is, though, the harder the stories you do, when you do come at it with a sledgehammer, when you do start looking into financial records, when you do start holding people accountable, it's going to get hard. People are going to get upset. They're going to start making phone calls. They might threaten you. They might file lawsuits. A whole bunch of issues start to happen. And that's why we're here. The Student Press Law Center is here to support you when you're reporting those stories. and you ruffle some feathers. When I was with Fresh Take Georgia, we started looking into the medical cannabis office. And that had just giant ramifications for the state of Georgia. It was agriculture, it was healthcare, and it was a lot of money. And we had students that was calling that office, wanting to have interviews with the director, looking at the bills, putting in public records requests, and my dean got a call at the time. Why are students down here asking these questions? And fortunately, my dean at the time asked me about it, and I said, well, we're going to continue asking about it because this is a huge, huge story for the state of Georgia, and taxpayers need to know. But that's the sort of threats that are going to come when you have more accountability journalism, and we want to make sure that you're prepared for that. Student journalists are doing absolutely consequential work across the country. Some of these stories I'm going to cite, I'm sure you've heard of. Some of them in high school live tweeted the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in South Florida. UNC's coverage in Chapel Hill, their coverage of their shooting on campus, was cited by President Biden. Theo Baker at Stanford, at the Stanford Daily, he wrote about their university president who stepped down for academic malfeasance. A student reporter at the Independent Alligator at University of Florida wrote about their president, Sass, at the time, who has since stepped down after burning through $17 million in 1 year in travel expenses. Northwestern's coach was fired because of a student investigation. And then obviously the coverage last year of campus protests around the country. Students were leading that. There was no brighter time in the last decade for student journalism. Student journalism was the headline on every major news organization for weeks because of the coverage that they were supplying that nobody else in the country had access to. Professional reporters couldn't even get on campus. Student journalists knew their community. They knew their students, their peers. They had the trust to get the reporting that nobody else could get. They were the very first documenters of history and played a really critical role in how that story played out around the world. That was not a local story. So student journalists are doing incredible, incredible work, but it's not easy. It comes with a whole bunch of threats. Those threats are financial, for one. The University of Kansas, the Daily Kansan, their student government board recently voted to cut 80% of their funding. The University of Southern California's paper is going to print less because of a shortage of money. The Daily Collegian at Penn State lost 100% of their funding. A rounding error in most universities' budgets. And forgive me, deans who deal with spreadsheets and P&L statements, I understand the pressures that come with that. Too often, student media publications lose a little bit every year. It's not every day that they come in and just lose the whole funding mechanism. They'll just get 10% here, 15% there, 20% the next year. It's death by 1,000 cuts. What's interesting is the First Amendment protects student media to say, you cannot cut my funding because you don't like my coverage. Well, it never really looks like that. It's never really black and white. Except sometimes these student governing boards don't understand the law and will literally say, well, we don't like what you write, so we're going to cut your funding. That's a pretty easy case for us to argue, and we generally have pretty good outcomes in that situation. But the reality of it is the business model has changed. The business model is fragile, and we've got to come up with ways collectively to support student media because it's not about just having a newspaper on campus. It has larger ramifications for democracy and society. In many cases, your advisors who are helping student journalists do this work do not get compensated for the extra pressure of being in that role. And I don't just mean college advisors, I mean high school advisors who are under just extraordinary pressure right now to lead a student media publication that might draw the ire of the community, that might put the school board or the principal in bad light. Many of them have just said, I'm 5 years from retirement, I can't do this. I can't do it to my family. They don't get extra pay. Maybe it's a college professor who has a 5-4 load. For those of you who don't know what that means they teach 5 classes in one semester, maybe 4 classes the next. Oh, and by the way, can you also oversee student media? That is a really challenging job when one mistake might bring a lawsuit, or one mistake might mean you have a lawmaker calling your provost or your president. The other part of it is students. A lot of students do not get paid for the work that they're doing on student media. One student I spoke to last week at a conference in DC, it was a think tank, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but she said she worked an entire semester, 40 hours a week for student media, and she got $600 for it. That is not an option for most college students. How many students in here have a part-time job right now? That's the norm. The number of you who are able to just say, well, I don't really need to get paid right now, so I'm going to go work for student media because I want to get those bylines and those clips so I can get experience, so I can get a job when I graduate, but I'm going to just not get paid during that time. It's not an option. It's a huge barrier to entry. We also know that as the business model changes and student media relies more on administrative funds from colleges and their host universities, that the chances of censorship goes up. The more money you receive from the school, the more pressure you're going to get to write stories that they like. The best case scenario is for you to be 100% nonprofit, standalone, off campus, and nobody can really tell you what to do. The Daily Tar Heels like that, the Independent Alligators like that. There's a handful of newspapers like that within the university system, but it's rare, and you need a really strong alumni base to do that. Legal arrests. We had 2 big cases last year. Charlotte Hampton, she's now on our board as a student member. She was arrested at Dartmouth covering protests, unlawfully arrested covering protests. And then Dylan Gohill at the Daily, at the Stanford paper. The Daily Stanford, that's not right. At the Stanford paper. 9 months Dylan Gohill had charges pending over him that were pretty serious felony charges that could have impacted the rest of his life. The university ends up dropping the charges and says, well, we're not going to pursue punitive measures, but it's up to the district attorney whether or not they will. Just 2 days ago, 9 months after he was arrested, he finally learned that the district attorney wasn't going to press charges. Imagine being a sophomore or junior in college, wondering if your whole life is wrecked because you got arrested covering a protest as a journalist. Harassment, many of you may have already experienced this. Harassment can look a whole bunch of different ways. It can be doxing. It can be online threats. It can be swatting. The harassment online is so pervasive. It's causing people to leave the industry, fear for their lives, and it's a real problem that we have to deal with. Another reason why students are leaving this field. And then just the lack of institutional support. So Seton Hall University recently shuttered their student newspaper, and the reasons they gave for shutting it down, the one that really stuck out the most to me was a broader lack of support for journalism and culture. That's just staggering to me. It means that we are not doing a good job of educating our students about the value of journalism in society. There's that phrase again. I'm going to come back to it again. I'm going to keep hitting it. The lack of institutional support. Trust. You've all heard that we've lost trust in media, I'm sure. The Edelman Trust Barometer just came out with a new report. 42% of U.S. respondents say they trust journalism. Social media plays a huge part of this. Big tech, they surge in profits, and their algorithms divide us. Gen Z, Gen Alpha, millennials, You did not grow up with 2 newspapers that were printed on your driveway, on your kitchen table. You didn't grow up in a time when there was 3 main network television news programs. You live in a cacophony of fact and fiction and noise, influencers. All of this has contributed to our lack of trust in our institutions. And we have to get that back. AI is already changing the world. What I will say is what we're seeing is the younger generations, they can spot AI a lot sooner, a lot faster than the older generations. You're going to be up here lecturing to us soon to tell us what we need to know about AI and how do we incorporate that into our lives safely. But all of this distrust is really a mechanism at play that benefits certain power players. In 2016, in a now infamous interview, President Trump told CBS 60 Minutes correspondent Leslie Stahl, "You know why I do this, right? Calling you fake news all the time? It's so that when you write stories unfavorable of me, nobody will believe you." Sadly, I think that's working. We have already seen in other authoritarian governments that sowing the seeds of doubt is part of the play. Sowing the seeds of doubt into our institutions, healthcare, education, science, and journalism. This is a methodical move. One of the exiled journalists that I spoke with in Washington last week said within 5 years, Russia completely destroyed journalism education. We're doing that all on our own. The administration doesn't have to kill journalism education. It's happening already, but we have a way to stop it. Anybody heard of New Voices? New Voices is a movement that is really run by the Student Press Law Center. I can take hardly any credit for it because it was happening way before I got here. But essentially, in 1988, the Supreme Court made a ruling that said student journalists can be censored for somewhat arbitrary and capricious reasons. And it really created a lane for censorship. Certain states then started to pass state laws to counteract the impact of that horrible ruling. For many, many years, there was only about 7 states that had New Voices laws. They weren't really called that then. In 2015, there was a gentleman by the name of Steve Listopad in North Dakota, and he worked with an undergraduate class to pass the John Walls New Voices Act, and that launched this movement. There are now 18 states with laws on the books that protect the rights of student journalists. But they're not all one law. We have a model bill that SPLC sends to legislatures, we send it to committees, we send it to advocates. But now, some states have student press freedom laws that protect you K through 12 in college. Some is middle school and high school and college. Some is private, some are public. They're really all over the place. Some of them have advisor protections, which is really important. Illinois has a great student press freedom law, but it didn't have advisor protections. Last year, a high school advisor was removed from her job because she would not censor her students, in contrast with the law. We're trying to get that bill amended this legislative session. The fact is that student journalists have fewer rights for free speech on campus than if you weren't a journalist. That seems wrong. We have to change that, and we're working diligently to do that. We've had 4 New Voices laws passed in the last 3 years. This is going to be a hard year. We have 9 states in play. We may or may not get one over the line. Georgia's not in play. We do not have a bill that's introduced in the state of Georgia. However, we do have students who are interested in building a coalition, talking to lawmakers, going down and testifying at the Capitol. If you're interested in getting involved in that work, come see me. I would love to introduce you to our New Voices team and the students, largely high school students, that are leading that movement here in Georgia. There's our map. If you go to splc.org, click on any of those states, you can really see the different levels of the law and how it works. But it's interesting because just because there's a New Voices law doesn't mean that you have a robust journalism program in that state. Our latest state that we had passed, well, it wasn't our latest. Minnesota was our last one. The one before that was Hawaii, I think 2 or 3 years ago. The high school advisor that spent years trying to get that bill passed said, well, it's great, we have a law now, but nobody's interested in journalism. We might shut down our class. We might have 1 or 2 students, because what they see is MSNBC and CNN and Fox News arguing on cable television, and they think that's journalism, and they say, I don't want to get involved in that. So we have a law to protect people who don't want to get involved in journalism. The pipeline is what I really want you to take home tonight. I'm going to use a baseball analogy because in my life, baseball solves everything. Go Braves. Baseball starts recruiting their next generation, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. South America, Central America, Little League fields all across America. Those kids then go on to AAU. They go on to high school. Some of them go on to college ball. Some of them go into the minors. And about 1% probably make it into the major leagues. But what happens along the way is we develop an entire generation of baseball fans, an entire generation of people who embrace the idea that baseball is our national pastime. We need to do the same with journalism. Student journalism is the seedbed of the journalism industry, and it's the nursery of democracy. Too often, students don't put 2 and 2 together. Maybe we don't do it as a collective body of educators to say that journalism is civic education as well. We need to make journalism cool again. This was from young people that I was talking to last year. When I started journalism in the early 90s, I'm here to tell you there was very few other options that were cooler than being a photojournalist. I wanted to be a Nat Geo photographer. I wanted to travel the world. I did get to do a lot of that. I covered Super Bowls. I covered World Series. I covered space shuttle launches. I went to Guantanamo Bay. I literally had a license to talk to anybody, go anywhere, tell stories all over the world, and get to know my community in a way that no other job allows you to do that. Journalism is the coolest job you can have. But it's also really, really hard for all the things that we've talked about so far. We need to start, this is my pitch, in kindergarten. Because so many of our upcoming generation no longer has those 2 newspapers on the kitchen table, a morning edition, an evening edition, because we are flooded with news and information, we can't tell what's real and what's not, because there are mechanisms at play that are trying to deceive us, we need to start teaching that next generation how to decipher what is real. Throw AI into that equation, and it's just really hard to wrap your head around where we're going to be in 10 years. But it's not as simple as news literacy. I've had some pushback. Oh, we do news literacy. If you just provide a good product to the audience, they'll buy it. Well, it goes way beyond news literacy. This is news and information literacy, understanding where information comes from, what's the primary source, how to decipher what's real, what's fake, what's fact, what's fiction, how to understand how it plays in an algorithm, how AI impacts it. All of this has to start at a younger age, because if you have news avoidance, if you're not introduced to news and information until you're 30 years old, the likelihood that you're going to go buy a local newspaper is probably not very high, and the chances are is that newspaper is not going to exist by the time you have that awakening and say, oh, this publication is an invaluable service to my life at this point. News avoidance is very, very real. I don't even want to do an informal poll of how many of you actually read local news, but the reality of it is we know that young people are not. We also know that 22% of 8th graders tested proficient or above in understanding how the country's constitutional democracy works. 22% of 8th graders. We know 35 states require civics education in high school. 15 don't. That seems strange. The No Child Left Behind Act really impacted our system of civics education. 5 states require civics education in middle school. Journalism can be a part of that. The Medill School of Journalism just introduced a new AP seminar module for journalism, which means you can get AP credit for a journalism class. This is a really unique idea in our core curriculum in this country. We need to put journalism back in that core space. I've heard that there's a lack of interest and a lack of institutional support for journalism. It's not cool, nobody's interested in it. Well, what if nobody was interested in math? Would we just eliminate math? Would we make it an option? Would we say math club is something you can do on the side, you don't really have to take math? No, because we've recognized that STEM classes are just vital to the future of our country. I'm arguing that journalism is as vital to the future of our country and as vital to our democracy as math. And we have to start in Little League so that by the time you get to high school, you already have muscle memory. You know how your government works. You know how to find information. You know how to decipher what's real and what's not. It is an urgent moment, and it's going to take all of us. I get the young people in this room that may be questioning whether journalism is the right field. I get it. It's unstable. The pay isn't what it should be. We know our brightest students are leaving the field 2, maybe 3 years after they graduate. They get the job and they realize these are transferable skills. I can go elsewhere with them. I recently just talked to the New York Times head recruiter. He says we are already in a crisis of a brain drain to where in 5 years they will no longer have candidates to fill the jobs, to do the work. Because journalism's not cool, it's too hard, the pay's not there, there's not support from our institutions. There's a whole long list of reasons. But what I implore everybody in this room to do, whether you're in a power position, a financial position, an educating position, it's going to take every one of us to scream from the mountaintops. Student journalism matters. It's making a difference in our community. We need to support it at a younger age so that those kids coming up from K through 12, by the time they get into college, journalism is valued again. They see the role that it plays in society. They see the role that it plays in a functioning, healthy democracy. We need to create more experiential learning opportunities for students, just like those Fresh Take Georgias and those Fresh Take Floridas, but at a younger age. It can be that cohesion journalism. It can be public affairs reporting. It can be school boards. It can be your city commission, or it might just be your hometown hero. But we need to get you those reps now, so by the time that you get into college and you graduate, you have the skills that the New York Times is looking for. They've had to bring in people to train their newest hires because they're lacking the skills to do the work. We are failing the system, but we don't have to. There's solutions out there, and some of it's already happening. I want to play a video for you guys to close, and then I'll take a couple of questions.
Student journalism is really important because it supplements local news in news deserts where local papers are dying. And it's also really important to stoke an enthusiasm for news in a generation where we have a really diseased relationship with the truth.
You have young people who are critically thinking about the industry, who are really thinking about the practice of journalism, how to improve it, how to serve their community best. These newsrooms are one of few ways in which people can learn the skills of journalism in a very hands-on way.
Student journalism is one of those few places at a school, where we are actually, not just teaching from a book about the importance of the First Amendment, but we're actually helping them put it into practice.
It used to be that student journalism was mostly for the benefit of the students. It was a training ground, preparation, skill building for the students who were taking part in it. But now it's actually providing that frontline journalism that communities rely on, because so many of our communities are news deserts now. If you have a newspaper at all, it's probably been diminished and hollowed out by layoffs. TV stations don't cover civics like they used to, don't cover those local government meetings like they used to. If there is not a student journalist going to your school board meeting, or if there's not a student journalist going to your college board of trustees meeting, there's an excellent chance that no journalist is going.
We should do what we can, I think, to support journalism, whether it is professional journalism or student journalism, because student journalism is journalism.
And I'll read one last quote from Ron Charles of the Washington Post in a recent book review he just did. He says, "This starts with getting reliable information into homes so kids regularly see what journalism looks and sounds like. High schools need to teach journalism, districts need to fund student papers, and principals need to keep their controversy-averse paws off these practices." I could not say that any better myself. So thank you, and I'll take some questions.
David Kearns from the library is going to be our Maury Povich and go around the room. If you have a question, he's going to come put the microphone near you so that we can all hear it. This is actually being recorded on Echo 360, so take it away. Who's got the first question?
Yes, sir. You inspired us with an opportunity for our students that they've never had before to be crucial to our community. But you also frightened us with the potential dangers. Are there any things that Augusta University could do as an institution to support or protect student journalists?
Absolutely. It's a great question. When I talked to this group of students last week at this roundtable discussion in Washington, D.C., we asked the students, and I'm going to get to your question, but I'm going to set it up here. What is it that they need from us to be able to go forward and do this work? And the first response was money. So any sort of and I realize if you're a university president right now, coming up with extra money to fund student journalism is probably not high on your list. But it also doesn't take hundreds of thousands of dollars to run a student media program that teaches student journalists these fundamental skills and provides a service to the community. The business model is changing, and we have to be very cognizant of that. When if a university wants to mitigate the risks, there's a couple things that I would recommend here, and it really has to do with these two models. If you have an independent student media, or a student media that is a traditional sense of a newspaper, etc., the best thing the university can do is just get out of the way. If the university is not dictating any coverage, the university can't get sued for it. It almost doesn't happen. So we would recommend those publications have media liability insurance, which costs money, and as all these threats go up, they need those premiums are going up for media liability insurance. But it's also one of those scenarios where the more hard-hitting news you do, the higher your premium goes up. The more experience you have, the premium comes down. The more soft news you do, premium comes down. The lack of experience you have, premium goes up. So it's not one model. But if you are a traditional student media that is publishing on your own, making all editorial decisions on your own, tell the university to just stay out of it. They cannot be held liable for something a student publication does that they're not involved in. And tell that student media publication to get media liability insurance, and through whatever forces possible, help them with funding. Get the conversation on campus to say, this is important, we need to support this from the local businesses, from the students, and from the administrative budget. The flip side of that is if you're in one of these news academic partnerships, now the publisher is the university. So what I tell everybody who's running one of these is go have a conversation with your provost, your president, your general counsel, your department head, and say, We want to run one of these. It serves the community in this capacity. We tell prospective students and parents that we provide a journalism education that is going to, give their young person the opportunity they're looking for, while also serving the community. So it's important we stand behind them. But to do that work, we have to have media liability insurance. To give you kind of a quote for one of those programs, about $1 million coverage for $3,000 a year. So that's not going to break most universities' budgets, but it is an ounce of prevention, and it lets the faculty members sleep at night. It lets the students sleep at night knowing that they have an actual media liability policy. But that's the big thing. If you're traditional student media, keep your hands out of it. Let them run it. Support them in whatever capacity you can. If you're non-traditional news academic partnership, get a policy, and just understand that it goes way beyond just having a course that's teaching a skill. It's providing a real community service, and that $3,000 for $1 million worth of coverage is really an ounce of prevention that'll probably pay dividends. When that threat comes in, you don't have to panic and say, oh my gosh, what do we do? And even if you don't get that policy, I would tell every faculty member, have that conversation with your department head before the semester starts to say, I think I would like to maybe do a model of this. What would we do if? When the temperature's down, everybody's calm. And I say that, I have had legal threats in a couple of these programs I ran, and by and large, they go away, but they cost money to make them go away. So do you have resources to help them go away, or do you call the Student Press Law Center? We can put you in touch with one of our pro bono attorneys, but most of the time it doesn't get to that. Does that answer your question?